Okay, good morning. Welcome to the Corporate Governance Committee. As this is the first meeting of the municipal year, we need to elect a chairman. So can I have nominations, please?
I'd like to propose Councillor Bray.
And do we have a seconder for that? Okay. Any other nominations? Okay, we all in favour of Mr. Bray being chairman?
This is where I can sell your bold spots. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks very much for re-electing Ms. Chairman. Second item on the agenda is the election of a deputy chairman. Any nominations, please? Mrs. Knight. Is that seconded? Seconded by Mr. Bohm. Any other nominations? No. So congratulations, Mrs. Knight. You are elected deputy chairman. Next item on the agenda is the minutes. I move that the minutes held on the 27th of March be confirmed as correct record. Do I have a second, please? Yes, thank you, Mr. Morris. Is that agreed? Excellent. Thank you very much. So we move on to questions now. There are no public questions and there are no member questions. To advise any other items of business, there are no urgent items. So item 7, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations they wish to make? Mr. Grimes?
I'll just a non-pecuniary declaration of interest regarding agenda item 10. I actually am working with some schools that have licence budget deficits at the moment.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. Any others? No? Okay. So item 8, presentation of petitions. There are no petitions. So we move on to the first main item on the agenda today, which is item 9. I think we've got an external presentation. Who's kicking off on this one, please? Ellen, are you joining us online?
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, committee. Hopefully I'm coming through loud and clear.
Yes,
so just
I can hear you very well. Thank you.
Good, thank you. It's just a very quick update presentation from me today. So you have a progress report in front of you that covers both the County Council and the Pension Fund audit, and this is prior to us starting the financial statement audit shortly. Those financial statements are due to be published by the 30th of June. So what the report you have demonstrates is that we've made really good progress and have delivered everything we should have to date as set out in the audit plan. And we've continued to make really good progress on interim samples. The report you have contains just a number of sector updates, and those are just purely for members' information. I'm conscious that you have quite big agendas here, but if there are any things on there that members wish further information on, I'm happy to take those outside the meeting if people want to get in touch, but hopefully those are self-explanatory. What you also have in the report is, as an appendix, is a timeline, and that's a letter that we've agreed with members of the finance team that sets out the really structured process that we're going to follow through the financial statement audit, including an escalation process should any of those timelines slip. Pension fund working papers are due with us for the 30th of June, so not that far away now, which will enable us to start the audit. And we've agreed a more structured approach, a more staggered approach for the County Council, with some key working papers requested in July, with others to be ready in August. And that timeline will enable us to report to you back in November and hopefully achieve sign-off by the end of the month. But that's all I wanted to say, Chair. I am happy to take any questions if there are any.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? No. Is anybody else wanting to come in? No. Okay. So committee is asked to note the progress of the external audit of the financial statement. Is that agreed? Anybody against? No, that is carried. Thank you very much. So item 10 then, we move on to the risk management update. As part of this item, there will be a presentation from Tim Brown, the Interim Director of Education, Inclusion and Additional Needs, on the risk around maintained primary schools. Over to you, Tim.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you, Chair. So if I can just start by saying that we've obviously been doing a lot of work around LA maintained school deficits. I'll give you a brief overview and then talk through some of the actions that we're taking in order to mitigate those risks as well. So we go to the next slide. So we've currently got 65 LA maintained primary schools in Leicestershire out of 283. And last year we started work on looking at what the situation was going to be over the next 5 years, because it became apparent that schools were facing a number of particular stresses, both nationally and that was also reflected locally. But that initial work showed that we were projecting by 29-30 a £45 million deficit, and the work we've done over the last 12 months has mitigated and reduced that deficit to just under 30 million. But whilst we managed to do that, there is still a significant risk. So if no other mitigations take place, 30 million deficit would fall to the council's budget balance sheet by 2030. And that's the work we're now doing, because we know that those deficits will continue to grow because of the national context that we're faced with. So those challenges, they're multifaceted. We first of all have the national impact of a range of pay awards which have not been funded to the full extent. We're seeing increasing energy costs and premises costs across a number of different areas. And again, nationally, we're seeing significant falls in the birth rate to its lowest ever. And that is causing a particular problem because we see primary schools now at their lowest level, because those pupils have now tipped over into secondary, and very shortly they will tip over into post-16 as well. So that whole system change is impacting pupil numbers and costs. What we're seeing though, across the county over the next 10 years, we will see around 40 to 45 new schools being built in areas where there are developments happening. But there are certain areas of the county where those developments will not impact pupil numbers and will not change the projected forecast as well. We're also seeing the national SEND crisis play out locally in terms of increased costs, with of course Leicestershire being the 5th lowest funded authority out of 151 for pupil funding. So again, that's another issue that we're currently faced with. This slide just sets out the forecast as it was in July 25. But as I said, we've done a lot of work since then, and we've now established that from the budget returns and the work we've been doing, there'll be a deficit by 29-30 of around £28 million if we don't have further mitigating measures put in place. So that means that we've already had just over a £17 million impact on reducing those deficits, which I think is to be applauded, but much more work to do. What we do know though, in 25-26, there was a £3.6 million net deficit, which was reflected in the council's accounts. So there's a number of risk mitigation measures we put in place. Last summer, I set up the School Sustainability Board, which is a high-level board which is overseeing all of the mitigations and recovery plans, right through from early intervention being the desired approach to recovery planning, and then looking at various actions that need to be taken across those schools, and providing really robust governance arrangements. And there's colleagues from across the council represented on that board. Since that time, we've put in place with finance colleagues a really robust deficit management policy. So any school going to deficit must apply for a licence deficit and demonstrate how they are going to return to a positive balance over 3 years, preferably, but 3 to 5 years. And that's been, again, really successful. We've put in place really tight budgeting criteria, which includes all schools must have a 5% contingency, because we know that they face risks during the year, not least because funding tends to change quite regularly. For example, the schools will be having to face very shortly the abolition of the PE grant, which again will impact some schools. So they need to have that buffer to address some of those particular concerns that arise. We put in place the school place planning strategy, and that was approved by Cabinet in February. And that focuses on the sustainability of schools, particularly where numbers have fallen due to the birth rate issues and where there is no housing expected in particular areas across the county. And there has been substantial training, support and guidance from a range of different professionals. So that's both with finance, but school improvement advisors and the like. And we also have some finance experts that we have commissions to do a deep dive into all of the LA Maintain school budgets to make sure they are robust, and it provides a really strong baseline in order to help us prioritise our interventions over the next year. So moving forward, I've talked about the budget submissions. So all schools had to revise their budgets and submit that by the end of May, which is a statutory requirement, and that's allowing us to provide high support, high challenge to individual schools and groups of schools where necessary. We have the recovery plans being assessed to make sure they are sustainable and they are viable, and again providing high support, high challenge. And then the programme for school reorganisation will take place following that robust analysis of those budgets. We have a number of particular criteria that we look at when we're looking to reorganise schools. I should say at this point that school closure is always the last resort, the very last resort, where there's no other option. There are the criteria that we use for reorganisation is where there is a very limited demand for places from children living within the immediate catchment area of a school, where surplus places exceed 25%, because that creates increasing financial pressure and quality pressures on schools. Where education standards are low, if they haven't got the funding, they can't provide the breadth and depth of curriculum and provide children with the learning experience that they all deserve in this country. Where the schools aren't financially viable and it's been forecasted long-term, medium to long-term, that the deficit just cannot be recovered despite other interventions. And then we also have an issue with some schools where their accommodation is just not fit for purpose for delivering the modern curriculum, and we'll look towards addressing those as part of the school reorganisation programme as well. So where we do intervene with schools, there are 5 key ways to do that. We look, first of all, at a financial restructure, so to make sure that we are looking at how structurally we can reorganise the school. So that could be undertaking a staffing restructure, reducing the type of staff that we have, or the support staff and teaching staff, so that they can return to an in-year sustainable position. We'll also look to the amalgamation of schools. So that could be looking at schools in a school planning area and saying, actually, we don't need the number of schools. We'll bring those together and create one single or a couple of viable schools because of the demand that there is in that particular area. We'll also look wherever possible to have all through primaries rather than separate infant and juniors. Infant and junior schools, it's an expensive model, and we can mitigate further costs by bringing schools together. And then finally, we'll look at academisation. Now, this is an option which we do look at regularly, but of course, as I would if I were a CEO, you want to make sure that you do your due diligence, and if schools have falling roles and increasing deficits, there will be some reluctance to take that particular school on. And then I talked finally about school closure always being the last option when you are looking to reorganise schools. You will have picked up in the media over the last week or so, lots of talk around Knaresworth Church of England primary school, and I raise that because it's a case example of the types of issues that a number of schools across the county will experience. Now we have 35 pupils on roll. They have surplus places of around 58%, and only 1 child from the catchment area. So it starts raising particular concerns. We know their budget deficit is rising,
and this financial year it will rise to just under £400,000. And we have been working with the governors to look at mitigating measures and factors that can be put into place. But what's clear from the forecasting is they will not come back into balance over a 5-year period, and pupil numbers will only dwindle further during that period as well. The school was rated good by Ofsted in 2024. However, as a result of the financial difficulties, standards have fallen for that school, and it's now performing below average out of 10 of the 12 key areas that we would be looking at for Key Stage 2. The school meets 4 of the criteria for reorganisation, and we've been working really hard with the governors to address those concerns. But the governors had an extraordinary governors meeting and came to the conclusion, quite rightly in my view, that the school wasn't financially viable going forward, despite any measures that either the council or they would be able to put into place. And so they have formally proposed closure to the council, and will now undertake a statutory closure process going into the autumn as well, whilst working with those families that would like to have alternative school places in other local schools, because there is lots of surplus at other schools within the area as well. So that's probably all I wanted to say at this point, Chair, if that's okay, but I'm very happy to answer any particular questions that members may have.
Yes, thank you very much. Mr. Grimes.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. As I mentioned earlier in the declaration of interest, I work in a governance capacity with a number of schools. I've got 1 or 2 questions, if that's all right, Chair. Right, you were talking about bringing in commissioning finance experts. Are these people external to the local authority?
Yes, they are.
Yeah, and what basis are they appointed, and what's their sort of background, if you like, in terms of that?
Yeah, they are financial experts that the Department for Education use to intervene in local areas, in local authorities where they are concerned around the financial viability of schools. So they are well versed at doing this work. It's their bread and butter. So we have a huge confidence in their ability to undertake this work really effectively in a very short space of time.
Yeah, thank you. I have been aware of some initial discussions taking place with these people, and 1 or 2 head teachers have actually commented that they were a little surprised about some of the lack of understanding from some of the people. But no doubt that at the moment they're only setting meetings up, so these are probably initial discussions in regards to that. Thanks very much for the the scenario of how you've outlined that. Have you been? What's the sort of communication with the school community, the school communities about this type of work?
Yeah, so we've been working with them. I first met our LA maintained schools at the end of last summer term to start talking through the issues that they were facing. And to be fair to them, they were raising the issues with us as well, which was really positive. And I was very clear that we would be looking at a school reorganisation programme, and we would involve them, because this is doing with, not to, because we need to make sure that we are providing solutions together for local areas and local schools. There's been lots of communication from a number of different colleagues over the course of the academic year. And that's included additional guidance and training, budget packs, and regular Q&A sessions. And more recently, I was at the Leicestershire Primary Heads meeting to provide an update at their last meeting of the term around the arrangements going forward, and looking at what we'd be doing early in the autumn in terms of the outcome from their budget submissions. I think it's fair to say this has been a very focused piece of work. It's meant that everyone's had to work at pace, but we've done it within the normal framework that schools would need to submit budgets. So they have to, by statute, submit budgets by the end of May. So we've worked within the ordinarily and the originally established framework, so that this wasn't additional pressure wherever we could mitigate that. The 1 bit of extra work that we've asked schools to do is to make sure that they are applying for a licence deficit, and they're providing a really clear action plan about how they intend to mitigate and bring their school budget back into surplus should they be expecting a deficit through the projections. And again, finance colleagues have been working very closely with schools. I know some schools have found that challenging because of the timeline, but we would ordinarily expect that type of response anyway to a budget deficit.
Thank you. Just the last couple. You said that about the finance experts looking at all budgets. Is that, did you literally mean all budgets, or are you talking all deficit budgets?
They'll be looking at all LA maintained budgets, regardless of whether they're in deficit or not.
Yeah, and the last point, you talked about academisation, and one of the, you covered one of the points I was going to ask about Matt's not wanting to take on people with deficit budgets. Just the other point, but you talk about use Dysworth as an example of closure, but that's a C of E school. In terms of the C of E schools, where, as you no doubt aware, the C of E maths and the DBE maths strategy, which is looking to reduce their numbers of maths. If you could, would you be looking about academisation into those DBE maths, or is there also going to be scenarios, there was talk at some stage of local authorities being able to set up maths as well? I don't know what your perspective on all of that is.
Yeah, no, great question. It would really be for the governing board to decide whether they want to join a particular MAT. The Church of England has published very clear criteria about their expectation of Church of England schools. Some schools have made that decision to already do that. Other schools do not wish to do that for a variety of reasons. However, we will explore a range of options, whether they be to academise or not, with those particular schools. I think it's fair to say that the problem we still come back to is the viability and pupil numbers and pupil forecasts, really, and where there's an appetite, because academisation on its own will not resolve those particular issues or concerns. In terms of the question about local authority MATs, I suppose really we're in that scenario already in many ways, because we provide services and functions to schools as any multi-academy trust would. I'm not sure what there would be to gain by formalising that arrangement, except incurring additional costs that we don't need to. Our maintained schools are keen to remain with the local authority, those that are have expressed that preference. But that's whether we form a local authority MAT is something I'll keep under advisement, but it's not currently something I'm minded to do at the current moment.
Thank you. Mr. Balls and then Mr. Poland.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think this is really sad, actually. I look around the room and I guess most of us will have been through some sort of maintained school in our lives. You know, me, I'm 42 now, so there wasn't really academies when I was at school. But I think what maintained schools offer is something very unique. I was a governor, I'm no longer a governor. And I sat on interview panels with new teachers who had left academy schools to go to maintained schools because they didn't like how academies work. They didn't like the business first pressures that they placed upon the schools, and that's ultimately what they are, their businesses. So they came back to maintain schools because they have an amazing place, an amazing role to play in our communities. What I find really frustrating is that often it's our support services as a county council that sometimes let them down. As a governor, our frustration was we used Bursa services that the county council run, and would change Bursa mid-year. So all that work and relationship we had would be lost. HR, the same. I know a lot of the strategies here are about restructuring, and that basically means staff losses. But you would be trying to go through the process and you'd have 3 or 4 points of contact. I think a lot of these issues, as you've said, are outside the control of local schools because of falling populations, lack of access. But I do think we can do a better job. And I guess my question would be, how are we improving those ancillary services like Bursa, like HR, to better support these schools so they can run more effectively? Because I spoke to the head at what I was a governor, the school I was a governor at, and they've actually cut their deficit because they're working towards a plan. They're working with yourselves to form a plan that works, so it can work and it can get themselves out of this. I just wonder what we're doing to improve their ancillary services so we can make this even more effective in the future.
Thank you. A really good question. So as part of the school reorganisation programme, we have invested £1 million in enhancing the support that we provide schools across a range of different areas. And that's with the purpose of obviously bringing them back into surplus, but that's across HR, school improvement, finance and other areas as well. So we would need to look and see what the lay of the land looks like once that programme's finished. But I am absolutely committed to providing high quality support services to our schools because it's children's education at the end of the day.
Mr. Poland and Mrs. Page.
Thank you. Just in terms of pupil numbers, and to be clear, I'm not just talking about Dysworth here. I don't know the school well enough to sort of ask the question. So in more general terms, to what extent are future pupil numbers taken into account? So for the sake of argument, I know there's a hell of a lot of development going on around Dysworth, but I understand that's industrial rather than residential, although members closer to it can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But again, in more general terms, if, for instance, a school X had very low numbers and a deficit like you're talking about, to the point where it wouldn't ordinarily be recommended for closure, but a council's gone and approved 1,000 houses being built, half a mile down the road, would the view then be, we'll hold on and try and subsidise this to get to a point in the future when it will then be needed, or would it be close it now because it's not financially valuable, and we'll cross that bridge when we come to it down the line? Effectively is my question there. And the second one, I guess, is more specific to do with Dysworth, although in general terms would be applicable to sort of any school in this circumstance. And that's do the children, where possible, move together to another school? And then my thinking behind that question is, obviously children will have friendship groups and support networks and so forth, and this is going to be quite a disruptive time anyway for them. So if there was sort of, to the extent it's possible to keep the friendship groups together, that might help mitigate to an extent that impact.
Thank you. Really good question. So going back to the first one initially, I should say school place planning is an art, not a science. You take in a range of different factors when you're doing forecasts, and they're done over an extensive period. And obviously, with all forecasting, the further you get away from the here and now, the less accurate it becomes. What they do, though, is they look at the birth rate. So we import birth rate data from our health colleagues. We map that onto known housing developments, and we plan when those housing developments are going to start building out. And we look at phasing any growth of new schools and new places in accordance with the demand, so we don't undermine existing schools in the system. Your point around would we look towards sustaining a school that's in deficit to wait for a development? Sometimes, yes. There are a couple of points to say about that, though, is that the revenue deficit grows pretty quickly with the school when they have low pupil numbers. So you've got to be very, very careful you don't let that get out of control. And in some instances, I'm not saying this has happened or going to happen in Leicestershire, but in my previous authority, we've taken a really hard decision to mothball a school temporarily over 7 or 8 years, because the revenue deficit would run into tens of millions of pounds. But knowing that a development will come along at some point, and the timelines change. Where I live, there's a development I've been waiting for 25 years. They started building the house last week. That was the first house. What I would also say is that some of our older schools, the building stock isn't at the best quality, and it's reaching the end of its natural life. So you have to start intervening in quite a robust way in order to make it fit for a 21st century curriculum. And I would certainly rather, and I know many parents would rather, you having a purpose-built brand new school on a new development at the expense of the developer, which provides all of those modern facilities that you would expect. Having said that, there is a scenario in one part of Leicestershire where we are currently maintaining a school, knowing that it has got a deficit, but we also know there's a development nearby which is going to build a brand new school, and we are negotiating building that school slightly larger so we can move the existing school onto that brand new site as the houses build out and as we get the pupil numbers coming through. So a range of different solutions, but what I would say, it's all specific to individual circumstances. You can't have a one size fits all with school place planning. So that's a particular issue. With regard to Dysworth, absolutely, I'm always keen on friendship groups moving together, and we provided that option for families. We'll keep doing that. We had a workshop for parents once the governors had informed them of their decision to propose closure, and looking at a range of different options, and that was including discussions with numbers of parents about whether they wanted their children to move together or not. And we've also been looking at various support mechanisms to make sure their transition to a new school will be hugely successful, and it will aid their learning as they go forward into their later primary years and later into secondary.
Mrs. Page?
Thank you, Chair. James's question really was part of mine, because I am really concerned with the ever increasing development. And for instance, in the area where I'm district councillor, we haven't got a 5-year housing supply, and the applications are coming in fast and furious. But another point you just made, which I didn't think of, it's that some of these schools are at the end of their life and may need replenishing anyway, which is very valuable to know. But I've got another question, and I'm sure you featured all of this in. So what are actually the largest and the biggest risks of this strategy? So because, you know, in case of housing, in case of developers having a viability assessment saying we can't afford this. So, you know, anyway, the risks, how do you deal with that? And the other thing it is, if we're talking amalgamation, again, James answered part of my question, but what about transport? Because there might not be a school within the near vicinity. So there is another financial risk, but there's also the travel, etc. Thank you.
Yeah, no, again, really good questions. If I answer the first question, the last question first, you're quite right. The transport is always a really important consideration. We come from the premise that we want local schools for local children. That's got to be the overriding premise, and quality local schools as well. Where children have to travel more than 2 miles at primary or 3 miles at secondary, by and large, the council has to provide transport. And that's funded from core council budget rather than the dedicated schools grant that goes to schools. So it's always on our minds around when you're looking at reorganisation and amalgamations, to make sure you're doing it in a sustainable way, and that cost shunt doesn't happen towards the council as well. So that's part of the school sustainability board to make sure it's cited on those particular issues, and we work with our transport colleagues as well. There are a number of risks. What's the greatest risk? I would say the greatest risk is cost inflation at the moment, because if we have a Section 106, which is you're obviously aware, which is developer contributions towards building new infrastructure, and a number of the historical Section 106s will not meet the cost of providing new schools because of the inflationary costs we've experienced more recently and the long lead-in time to the development actually happening. What we do to mitigate that is we pass the risk back to developers where we can by negotiating them to build the school for us. And that works in terms of they have to bear all the risk, delivery costs, and they can actually do it more cheaply than we can do it, because that's their core business. But it means that we don't have to mitigate any of those risks about cost inflation, which can be quite significant over time. The other risk, I suppose, is it's the lead in time developments. They change enormously. The overriding economic situation the country faces changes the build time. And then you have to readjust your planning in a particular area because of that as well. So that's why I say school planning is an art, not a science. And we have to make sure that we're keeping all of those factors into consideration. But we do that at least annually, and then we reflect that in our planning and our pupil forecast for schools.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry about that. Yes, we're talking Section 106, but a lot of authorities are going to a SIL. And I've just recently been involved in trying to work out the SIL, and the income from a SIL is nowhere near enough to mitigate all of the infrastructure cost. So to me, that is a huge risk as well, because one of the things which is very important for our future and our economic well-being is the education of the children and our roads. And so, you know, how is this all going to square if developers aren't going to make the profit? And eventually, so the question is, what priority is given legally to providing new schools and school places? You know, because once they're gone, they're gone.
I'm going to be very careful not straying into wider discussions and topics, because it's a huge issue, and I would love to debate that with you. What I would say is that it's for the local planning area and the county council to push its own priorities and make sure we've got adequate funding. SIL does create its own complications, but we are introducing various policy arrangements around our expectations and around pupil yields to make sure we get enough capital for school places across the county.
Thank you. I didn't see any. Oh, sorry. Yes, Mr. Powell again.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question to one of the answers given to Mrs. Page, actually. It's not, be honest, it's not something I'd thought about before, but it's an interesting point in terms of inflation and the effect. So when we bid for Section 106, we bid for a specific amount, I assume, £100,000 or whatever it might be, and that's written down. Does that therefore not include inflation? So £100,000 now, it takes them 10 years to build the development. 10 years, it's still £100,000 rather than taking into account inflation. And if that is the case, could it take into account inflation? Because clearly they'll be doing the developer will be doing a viability study based on the cost of a house today, presumably. Whereas if it was 10 years from now, they'll be selling it at whatever the going rate is at that time. So I don't think it would be an unreasonable point to link it to inflation.
Yeah, no, a really good point. A couple of things, I suppose, is that we would make sure that that's why we like developers to build their own schools, because it mitigates that completely. Some of the historical 106s have not always taken that into account, because you just don't know what you don't know at the time. But our modern agreements do look at that as a particular factor. But again, and probably another debate all on its own as well, I suspect.
Any other questions on this part? No. Well, thank you very much, Tim, for that presentation. I think that's very, very informative. We now move on to the main report back set out as on pages 39 to 54 of the agenda, and Neil Jones, our head of internal audit, present the report. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. So this is risk management update, and it's a routine report which provides assurance to the council's risk management remains effective, and that there's active oversight of both current and emerging risks. So the corporate risk register continues to capture our most significant strategic risks and is actively reviewed and updated. Since the last report, one risk has been removed relating to the long-term financial impact of asylum seekers. This reflects reduced exposure following the closure of a large accommodation site, alongside improved national controls and local resilience. In terms of emerging risks, the key focus is the impact of the Iran conflict. We're still seeing increased requests from suppliers for price uplifts, particularly in highway-based and transport. The council has a coordinated cross-council approach in that, in now trying to assess these requests consistently. At present, the financial impacts have been contained, with most pressures negotiated down. However, taxi contracts remain a potential cumulative risk if cost increases escalate. There's also early signs of supply chain disruption that may speed up a little bit now, and although it's not yet affected service delivery. And then on local government reorganisation, the council submitted its response to the statutory consultation, with the decision still expected in July. In the meantime, no regrets, preparatory work is progressing across key areas such as finance, HR and assets, ensuring the readiness for any outcome. In summary, the risks are being actively managed, emerging issues are being identified early and appropriate controls are in place. I'll gladly take any questions on the report or the appendix which contains the updates to the corporate risks.
Thank you very much, Neil. Are there any questions on the main part of the report or comments? No. Okay, so we move on to the recommendations then. So recommendation A, the committee is asked to approve the current status of the corporate and strategic risks facing the county council. I'm happy to move this recommendation. Is there a seconder, please? Second it. Mrs. Bottomley, thank you. Those in favour? Any against? That's carried. So regarding recommendation B, if we've obviously had this deep dive into schools this morning. If we've done highways and cyber risk and other things. If there's anything else that anybody wants to look at in future meetings, if they can let Gemma know, and we'll agree that nearer the time. Okay. And then lastly, recommendation C, the updates are noted. Is that agreed? Excellent. Thank you very much. So move on to item 11 then, which is the annual Treasury Management Report, and I'll hand over to Jason, our Head of Finance.
Thank you, Chair. This is the annual Treasury Management Report, and it starts on page 55, the agenda pack. So the report provides a summary of the Council's Treasury Management activity that has taken place over the last quarter of 2025-26. And it provides a summary.
Excuse me, Chairman, could you speak up a bit, please?
Oh, sorry, I'll lean in. Is the microphone? Is that okay? Right, I'll get closer. So this is the annual Treasury Management Report. It also includes an update on the last quarter for financial year 25-26. It's a requirement of the CITFA Treasury Management Code that the report is presented by the end of September following the financial year. And after this meeting, the report will go to Cabinet on the 21st of July, together with any comments or issues raised at today's meeting. So just a reminder, Treasury Management reports are reported quarterly to this committee over the course of the year. And obviously there's been 3 already, and this report will cover the last quarter. So turning to paragraph 3, this gives a definition of what Treasury Management is, and essentially it's ensuring that the funds held as cash and in investments are utilised effectively as possible without subjecting the council to undue risks. So moving forward, turning to paragraph 5 and the action taken during the last quarter. So in those reports, we include an update on the latest economic summary as provided by our Treasury Management advisors, and a copy is attached as Appendix A. And as with those reports, the regime in which Treasury Management operates is heavily influenced by the economic circumstances. And as such, there's always a need to be mindful of potential issues that might affect, such as interest rates, inflation levels, and government yields on government bonds. So paragraph 5 to 8 draws out some of those key issues of the most recent summaries. Inflation rates continue to be volatile and are expected to rise from their current levels of 2.8% to 4 to 4.5% in the coming months, before reducing again during the next calendar year to 2%. Because of some of that inflation pressure persisting, the Bank of England's base rate, whilst having reduced from its high in 2024, when we and 4.75 was when we set the budget back in January 25. That's a lot higher than markets were forecasting it to be 6 months ago. So it's good news for Treasury Management that the rates have stayed higher, but as we just heard, the problem with inflation is we're getting higher returns, but it goes only a small way to offsetting those increasing cost pressures that the council faces. Turn to paragraph 9. This provides a summary position on the short-term investments that the council holds, those up to 12 months for the last quarter. and just shows during the period the total amount invested decreased from 346 million to 336 million. 41 million of investments matured, with 31 million of new investments placed at an average percentage rate of 3.85% for new loans. Slight fall on the previous quarter from 4.05, and that reflects the latest forecast that interest rates are going to start reducing again. The weighted average duration of the portfolio has decreased from 167 days to 109. And that was whilst the council was looking at some options of repaying some loans early. But we wanted to keep some cash available for that flexibility. The other comment just to make, within the table, there are loans or investments greater than 12 months. And just to remind the committee that they are managed through the Investing in Leicestershire programme, rather than through the Treasury Management strategy. And they are monitored through the Cabinet and through the Scrutiny Commission. Paragraph 30 is the table that summarises the investments, and that shows the total investments held. So as I mentioned, 336 in short-term investments, 52 in long-term. And then following that table, there's a couple of charts that show the sovereignty and institutional credit ratings of where those investments are placed. And as you'll see, the majority of investments are all within the top credit rating classes. Paragraph 16 shows the average APR, or annual percentage rate, for the short-term investments. Similar to what I mentioned earlier, is slightly decreased during the quarter, again driven by the rates that we're able to get on new loans as they're being placed. So there's forecasts are slightly lower as rates are reduced.
Jason, can you pull the microphone even closer? Because I think people are struggling now again still.
Shall I switch? So
Yeah, yeah, potentially.
Works. Is that better? Yeah, it's with that microphone.
Right.
Okay, so I think we're at paragraph 17. Is that coming across better? So that summarises the council's long-term investment, so those that mature greater than 12 months from the original investment date, and that includes private debt, bank risk share funds, pooled property and pooled infrastructure investments. And as I mentioned, these are controlled and managed through the Investing in Leicestershire strategy. Moving through the report, paragraphs 24 to 27 covers the early repayment of external debt during the last quarter. And this followed elevated gilt yields at rising to historic highs, 20-year plus highs, caused by inflation remaining above the Bank of England's 2% target. So as a result, there were opportunities, there was increases in the discounts available to the council for the premature repayment of PWLB debt, so Public Works Loans Board debt from the government. So having consulted with the council's Treasury Management advisors, the council repaid £15 million of that debt in the last quarter, incurring a premium of 3.5 million. The net projected saving by repaying these loans early is approximately 400,000 per annum for the next, well, for the remaining life of those original loans, for the next 25 to 30 years. And as a result, the council's external debt at year end, so 31st of March 26, reduced to 131 million. Paragraph 28 summarises the Treasury Management position for the financial year. And that brings together the approval of the Treasury Management Strategy Statement. So that starts in January 25, that comes to this committee. It then gets approved by full Cabinet as part of the MTFS and the Council in February 25. And then, as I mentioned earlier, quarterly reports are brought to this committee during the financial year. So I wasn't going to cover those in detail. They're reported throughout the year, but provides a summary of where we landed in total. Paragraph 50 just covers the council's prudential and treasury management indicators, and these explain the council operated within the limits for the year except for actual capital financing costs as a percentage of net revenue stream, which was due to the premiums paid on the early repayment of debt. So paying those premiums early was a cost, but over the life that's remaining, they will still be a saving to the county council. And then finally, paragraph 51 gives an update on the interest that's earned on the short-term investments for the financial year, and that totaled 16.6 million. That was 4.6 million more than the 12 million we budgeted for, mainly due to interest rates being higher than we expected, staying higher, and also the council's balances being higher than when the budget was set back in February 25. So that's everything I wanted to say. Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry about the microphone.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for persevering. Any questions or anything? Yes, Rosita.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. Page 64.43, I don't understand. What means under-borrowed, please?
That's a good question. And it's a technical explanation. So the council's requirement for borrowing is called the capital financing requirement. So that's the total amount of borrowing the council requires to fund its historic capital programme. And the council then decides, looking across all the balances that it has available, how much it needs to borrow to fund that requirement. So it can borrow it externally through loans, or it can borrow it from itself, called internal borrowing. So if just let me make sure I've got the right numbers here. So paragraph 43, we're saying that we were 63 under borrowed. So just for example, the capital finance requirement is 200 million. If we had actual debt of 160 million, we would be under borrowed against that. We're borrowing 63 million from ourselves. It's quite technical, but we're using our investments to fund that borrowing instead of going to the external markets, usually at a higher interest rate. So it's not always that way round, but it has
Just
been
to
for a
get
while.
this into my head, I'm a bit dim, you see. So the council has got a balanced budget, which means incomes have to be equally to outgoings, right? So then the borrowing, does that come into the incomes as well? And then, you know, you have less. I still can't get my head around it. So do you know what I'm trying to say?
So we're talking about the capital programme here. So yeah, income and expenditure often it can be the revenue budget, but on the capital programme, we set a capital programme that has a borrowing requirement. So for instance, we've got expenditure of 100 million and we've got funds of 40 million, so therefore we need to borrow 60. That becomes our borrowing requirement, and that's what we're talking about there. How are we financing that borrowing requirement? So it is a shortfall, but funded through borrow.
If I may, just to clarify, Mrs. Page, I think in terms of, you're absolutely right. When the council sets its budget in its MTFS each year in February, the revenue budget has to be balanced, and we're not able to borrow for the revenue budget. The capital programme, however, is financed differently, and we are able to borrow to finance the capital programme.
Mr. Orson.
Yeah, thank you very much. Is it okay to ask a question on the appendix? I mean, the appendix was written by the MUFG, which is not the county council, but it's in the county council paper. So maybe just an opinion at least can be given. I mean, obviously it talks about fiscal rules, and here we are as a country. We have a new prime minister coming in, and of course fiscal rules are being popped up in the national agenda big time. The Chancellor, shall we say, faces an uncertain future. And so when this was written, we didn't know any of that, of course. So it shows how things can change in the financial market. But I got a couple of maybe I've got two questions here, but I'll see if I can get them into observations really and put them together actually. But the report does suggest that the bank rate will ease despite inflation remaining stubborn and global pressures still very much in play. So the question was, could you clarify what gives confidence in that outlook, given the risks you've highlighted appear to point the other way? And those risks are, and I'll try and answer my own question, we're told there's a 22.5 billion of fiscal headroom, yet the same document notes significant gilt market volatility. So how resilient is that headroom once you factor in even modest yield movements? And is it as secure as the report presents?
I'm not an economist, so I can't answer it exactly, but I think inflation's high at the moment, but the forecast we're seeing is that inflation will ease. There's a spike at the moment with the fuel price increase as a result of the Iran conflict. So the forecasts are that inflation, so the recent Bank of England MPC meeting, I think they voted 7-2 to keep rates at 3.75. So I think that's increasing confidence that they believe inflation is going to ease. So, you know, I don't know if that helps answers. The gilt yields they move around depending on confidence the market has with the government's ability to pay the yields on the gilts. So there has been volatility there with some of the political pressures that the government had in the last month or two. Whether or not they ease, I can't really say, but there was some definite spikes in gilt yields over the last 2 to 3 months because of those two things, the Iran war and some of the political risks around potential, the challenge to a new prime minister and what that might mean for the government's priorities.
If I just add to that briefly, and Jason's absolutely right in what he's just said, but I think there's lots of competing factors at play in the economy that are likely to affect future kind of interest rates and inflation. And as Jason said, we are expecting inflation to ease, and I think part of that actually is also expect as kind of weaker growth and kind of higher unemployment potentially as well, which might also mean that the government has to take different action in terms of interest rates as well. But as I said, there's so many different factors and so much uncertainty politically and in terms of the kind of international politics as well. But and this may well change by the next forecast. It's something we'll need to keep our eye on.
Thank you, Simone. Mr. Bowman?
Thank you, Chair. First, it's rather unusual. I'm asking a question and you're behind me, but I'll try to pivot a bit. I feel a bit rude almost, but firstly, I'd like to thank the officers, obviously, for the report before us today. It's encouraging to see the council continuing to take a responsible approach to its finances and treasury management. I've got 2 questions, if that's all right. Firstly, for the benefit of both members and members of the public watching today's meeting, whether online or here, I'd like to read out a few numbers or figures that I have and ask officers to confirm whether they are correct, really. And so since May 2025, am I right in saying the Reform UK administration has repaid a total of 70.9 million of external debt? And this has reduced the county council's external debt to its lowest recorded level and reduced the capital programme funding shortfall from 84 million to 65 million. So that's the first one, if you could confirm whether those figures are correct. Secondly, would you be able to confirm whether the early debt repayments are 70.9 million since May 2025, including the recent 26.9 million repayment, will deliver a net financial saving for Leicestershire taxpayers, specifically after taking into account both the interest saved from repaying the debt early and the investment income that the council would otherwise have earned on those funds? Is the overall financial position a net benefit to the taxpayer? Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Bowman, that's your social media clip for this afternoon. Mr. Frith?
So the first question, since But last financial year and this financial year to date, the council has repaid 70.9 million of external debt. That is correct. And the capital programme that sets the shortfall, the capital borrowing requirement, the programme has, the shortfall has reduced to 65 million in the latest MTFS from 84 million that was the previous year's capital programme shortfall.
Mr. Orson, your
This-
microphone's still on.
Sorry.
Mr. Orson? Mr. Orson, the microphone.
The second question, yes, as the report says, when we've repaid debt, the primary purpose of repaying debt early is to reduce the revenue implications of those capital financing costs. So yes, they have reduced the costs, and that's the same with the previous repayment of debt that the council has done.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments, Mr. Mayor?
Cheers. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the report and the presentation of it. I just wanted to touch on the debt and the repayment. Obviously, the Reform Party administration have made such a big fuss of it, but it's pretty much standard stuff. You know, we sit on other authorities where we borrow and repay debt all the time, depending on as and when we need to fund capital programs, in essence. So yeah, but it does cost us. You know, it's cost us 3 million or £3.5 million to repay this debt early. If you look at the report there, and probably more because that's just what's written here. And I'm just, you know, curious as to, with LGR coming up and reorganisation happening, what the benefit is to this authority in the immediacy, because obviously it's taken us 3-4 years worth of interest rates payments to be able to pay that debt off. We could have actually used that money elsewhere potentially, because the benefit of that saving isn't going to be felt by this authority at all, because this authority won't exist in 20 months' time, say 2 years' time. So yeah, it's just the wisdom of saying that you're paying debt off, but it's cost us 3 or 4 years worth of interest payments to pay it off, and this authority isn't going to be in this form going forward. So yeah, it's just pointing that out. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I think that was a comment more than a question for officers. Anything else on this item? So we're asked to note the contents of the report. I'm happy to move that. Is that seconded, please? Mr. Balls, thank you very much. All agreed? Anybody against? No. Okay. So the item 12 is the SIP for Financial Management Code, and I think this is Jason again, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So yeah, the SIP for Financial Management Code, this relates to 2026-27 and starts on page 71 of the agenda pack. So the report informs the committee of the council's compliance with the SIP for Financial Management Code for the year 26-27. The code was introduced in 2021 to support good practice in financial management and to assist local authorities in demonstrating their financial sustainability. So the code is based on a series of 6 principles supported by 7 specific standards, which are considered necessary for a local authority to have a strong foundation to manage its short, medium and long-term finances. So each local authority across the country is expected to demonstrate that the requirements of the code are being satisfied. And for 26-27, the officers have, so this finance, legal, internal audit as well, so quite a few across the board. Officers have completed a self-assessment of the council's compliance with the requirements of the code, and that is attached as Appendix A. The assessment also includes an update on recommendations or progress against recommendations to the council that have been made throughout the year by the external auditor, and that latest progress is reported in Appendix B. The self-assessment against the Financial Management Code shows that the council meets the requirements of the code, with some minor areas for improvement as reported in the appendix. Internal Audit Service has reviewed the self-assessment, and they've concluded that there are no issues to report. And the committee is asked to note the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments on this one? No, again, we're asked to note it, so I'll move the recommendation. Is that seconded, please? Mr. Bowles again, or Mr. Mears, anybody? All agreed? Anybody against? No. Thank you very much, Jason, for that. We now move on to the Head of Internal Audit Annual Report. We've got Neil in the room and I think also John Slater from Nottingham Council, who is joining via Teams for the shared services part. Neil.
Yes, Chair. Sorry, I didn't quite catch that, whether you informed about John Slater. He's on, yeah, sorry. Okay, so thank you. And this report fulfills the committee's responsibility to review the effectiveness of the council's internal audit arrangements and supports the wider governance framework. The purpose of today's report is straightforward, really, which is to provide my overall conclusion on the council's governance, risk management and control environment, and to summarise the work of internal audit service over the year. The report will also be circulated to all members following this meeting. The annual report itself is found in the appendix, pages 105 to 116, but I'll summarise the position for the committee. So in terms of my overall conclusion, as with previous years, I'm able to give a reasonable assurance conclusion for 2025-26. This means that I consider the council's arrangements for governance, risk management and control to be overall adequate and effective. It's important to note that reasonable assurance recognises that controls reduce risk to an acceptable level, but cannot eliminate risk entirely. The key reasons for the conclusion is based on several factors. We've got a strong programme of audit work, internal audit work with sufficient coverage across key risk areas. We've got continued engagement with senior management in terms of accepting any recommendations and moving things forward. We are very transparent in reporting our governance issues, including within the annual governance statement, and we get regular updates to the corporate risk register, which you've seen this morning. So during the year, 61 audits were completed. 8 of those audits did result in either a high import recommendation or a partial assurance conclusion. These reports, the results of these audits are all reported to committee during the year and are subject to follow-up. The detail is contained in Annex 1, pages 117 to 136, and apologies for that, it is labelled as an Annex 2. I also get wider sources of assurance. So I mentioned John from Nottingham City Council. They provide internal audit work on the East Midlands Shared Service financial systems. And for 25-26, that resulted in a significant level of assurance, which is a great improvement. The Head of Internal Audits report is to be found at Annex 2, pages 137 to 139. I also take assurance from the External Auditor's annual report, and then this year we gained assurance. I did raise with members an issue around prepaid card provision on direct payments, so I sought assurance from their internal auditors that things were improving, and they gave it. So these provided all positive supplementary assurance to me. Key headlines from the year. Some key themes are most audits resulted in substantial assurance rating. Any areas with low assurance are actively followed up. There's a balanced programme of assurance and advisory work. Excuse me, our customer satisfaction returns remain strong. We have ongoing staff development and training, and the service generally conforms to internal audit standards. I'll come on to that in a little bit more in a while. There are some emerging risks and issues, and that's we've had a small increase in reactive investigations. We've got a counter fraud report to discuss in a while. And whilst that could be an indicator of control pressure, the management response on those has remained positive and proactive. So overall, I've seen a continued strong ownership of control improvements across the organisation. I mentioned about internal audit standards. So in line with the new global internal audit standards introduced from April 2025, I self-assess the service as generally conforming. That's against the standards, the application note and the code of practice for the governance in internal audit in local government. Generally conforming sounds a bit flat, I would say, but it is actually the highest rating. The summary outcome of those actions required are in Annex 3, page 141. I also revised the services quality assurance improvement programme, which is found in Annex 4. And again, there's some minor areas for enhancement. Both the conformance exercise and the quality assurance programme review demonstrate that internal audit remains robust, compliant and improving. Resources, in terms of resources, there was a budget underspend, mainly due to staff vacancies, which we're working through, and additional income from external audit work. Importantly, this hasn't prevented delivery of the annual conclusion. So in summing up, the council continues to maintain a sound control of governance, risk management and internal control. Internal audit has delivered a strong programme of work and the service continues to meet professional standards whilst improving further. That concludes my report, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Neil. Any questions for Neil? Mr. Dawson.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. As always, a solid report from you. And I'm not totally sure, by the way, but you may have answered part of my question, but I'm sure my hearing aids aren't up to scratch today. And you're doing that as well. So obviously your hearing going like mine, I think, a little bit. But it does go to the annex again, the self-assessment, understanding the assessment. I did hear you mention the words generally conforms. Did hear that part. But could you talk me through, and I may have missed it, and I apologise if I did, but through the key areas that give you the confidence in reaching that judgment? And the second question, while I'm at it, by the way, and then it saves messing around, especially Chair's time, but exploring the improvements needs. You mentioned that improvement actions tend to be incremental. It would be helpful to me to understand how you determine whether incremental change is sufficient and how you identify when a more substantial shift might be needed.
Okay, so the term generally conforms. So there's a conformance model, which is a bit of a beast. It's got something like 10 tabs, and each tab's got about, I don't know, 150 rows in. So we plough through that line by line, looking at what the conformance requirement is and putting a score in against that, which is based on and this wasn't just me on my own. I had my 2 audit managers with me, and we talk it through with Simone in terms of how we've approached this model. So it wasn't just my personal reflection. And what you do is you go through line by line. You then look at what evidence you could provide to support that requirement. Have we got that evidence in the back? And then we base our sort of decision on that. And the 3 options are in the conformance model: generally conforms, partially conforms, or does not conform in terms of that particular line. We multiply that times 100 rows times 10 tabs, and that's how on overall there are improvements. So we what you see in the appendix are where we can put in, yes, we generally conform, but we recognise that we may need to improve a little bit here, a little bit there. So there's one particular thing that came in the new standards from April 2025, where I guess you're probably right in your second question. Is it a fundamental shift in that the standards request that you require that you demonstrate the use of root cause analysis in your recommendations and findings. So that is where you continue to drill down and drill down and drill down until you get to the bottom of what has actually caused something to go wrong. Now, that's not something new for internal auditors, but in terms of it badged up in terms of that thing, we're having to learn a new way of doing that. And in fact, since this report was done, we've made some real progress in that. So I hope that explains how we get to the generally conform status. So it's on the basis of that whole model in terms of all the scores that we've put in. And there were a few where we put partially conforms, but obviously I couldn't bring that model to this committee because it's just too big. But there were some where we put partially conform. But if we put partially conform, then we put a little note in to say what we need to do to that. But when you look at it in totality, that's where you get to the generally conforms. And then the second bit about being incremental or hopefully that was one example whereby it's probably a little bit more fundamental change than incremental. But on the whole, if I looked at without looking at the schedule at the moment, they're mostly incremental. Is that okay?
Yes, he always gives a solid response. Thanks very much, Chair.
Anything else for Neil before I invite John to speak if he wants to speak? No? Okay. John, did you want to come in?
I think just to say that for EMSS, core systems are strong. There's positive direction of travel. Payroll is improving with some work to do. But I think you can take away that there is a strong positive direction of travel for East Midlands Shared Services, and we will continue to work with them to help them continue to improve.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? No. Okay, so we are again asked to note the report. I'm happy to move that. Is that seconded? Yeah, Mr. Whitford, thank you. All in favour? It's carried. Thank you very much. I've been asked if we can take item 15 next rather than 14. So I'll do that with agreement. Thank you. So item 15, then provisional draft annual governance statement. And again, Neil, please.
Chair, I'd hope we could swap the agenda items on this, if you don't mind. To have the local code first.
All right. Okay. So no problem. Yeah, do it whichever order you wish, Neil.
There is a reason. I'll explain the reason in so much that the local code feeds into the annual governance statement. So if we discuss the local code first, presenting, it's a joint report, this one, with the Director of Law of Governance, excuse me, and it's the revised local code of corporate governance. And hereinafter, I'm just going to refer to it as the local code. So the local code, it isn't a statutory requirement, but it is considered good practice by SIPFA and SOLACE, which is the Chief Executive's organisation. So what I'm here to do is to seek the committee's support for an updated local code, ensure it remains current, effective and aligned with best practice. So by way of context, the Council's governance framework is underpinned by the SIPFA SOLACE Delivering Good Governance Framework. And that sets out 7 core principles, including integrity and openness, effective decision making, risk and performance management, transparency and accountability. The framework isn't prescriptive, but it does expect authorities to maintain a local code that reflects our own governance arrangements and demonstrates how these principles are achieved in practice. So since the committee last reviewed the code in May 2022, there have been some important developments. The biggest of those is probably SIPFA did an addendum in May 2025, not May 19, and introduced the concept of core governance arrangements, and they are found in Appendix 3. So that it evolved expectations around transparency and assurance, financial resilience and emerging risks such as cyber and AI. And the revised code responds directly to those changes. The review has been a collaborative exercise involving the monitoring officer, governance and democratic services, finance and the internal audit and assurance function. We assess the Council's arrangement principle by principle against the updated framework and core requirements, and the updated local code is found in Appendix 1. There are key changes to the code in 2026, and it's important to stress it's an evolution, not a redesign. So the main enhancements are it does align with the latest SIPFA guidance and audit standards. There's stronger emphasis on assurance, transparency and accountability. There's greater coverage of modern risks, including cyber and AI. It's strengthened financial oversight and procurement governance. And there are updates to reflect current strategies and partnership working. So overall, the code is now more comprehensive, and that's clearly shown in Appendix 2, which compares the updated code to the previous version from 2022. And the code is also aligned to the government's best value expectations. The code's not just a document, it underpins how governance works day to day, and it will be published and communicated across the organisation. Managers will be expected to embed it through in behaviours and decision making, and departments self-assess compliance and that feeds into the annual governance statement. This ensures governance is actively monitored and not just documented. So in conclusion, the revised local code represents a more mature and up-to-date governance framework. It providing stronger assurance that the Council is operating effectively, it's managing risks appropriately, and it's meeting current standards of good governance. That's all I have to say, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. Any questions or comments on that, please? No? Excellent. So again, recommendation, happy to move. Is that seconded? Yeah, Mr. Balls is nodding. Thank you very much. All agreed. Excellent. Thank you. And so moving on to item 15.
Yeah, so thank you, Chair. Now on to the annual governance statement for 2025-26. So again, the purpose of the report is twofold: to outline the approach we've taken to preparing the annual governance statement and to present the provisional draft for your comment ahead of publication alongside the statement of accounts, which is due by the 30th of June. So the annual government statement is a statutory requirement, and this is under the accounts and audit regulations. So in simple terms, it's the council's public accountability statement explaining how effective our governance arrangements have been, not just for the county council, but for any significant group entities, for example, ESPO and East Midlands Shared Services, and also our commercial and collaborative arrangements that the council is involved in. And it provides a fuller picture, including assurances on those areas. It also explains how well we've managed risks and internal control and what improvements are needed going forward. The AGS is built up by using multiple sources of assurance, bringing together both corporate and departmental perspectives. Key elements of those include departmental self-assessments against the local code, which I've just mentioned, internal and external audit reports, conclusions and findings, my head of internal audit annual conclusion, which on arrangements for governance, risk management and control, which we've just been through, wider intelligence such as governance issues and external scrutiny. And each department, I think I mentioned, provides a scored assessment which helps them to give a clear evidence-based view of their effectiveness across the organisation. The process is overseen by a senior officer group, including the monitoring officer, the chief financial officer and other high-ranking officers, and that ensures corporate ownership of the final statement. The headline position is positive. The council is satisfied that its governance arrangements remain fit for purpose. That said, the AGS is designed to be transparent and balanced, so it also highlights areas requiring improvement. The AGS allows us to identify what constitutes significant governance issues, including matters that impact delivery of key objectives, have financial or reputational consequences, or may require formal intervention or attract public concern. So we had some existing significant governance issues in previous years, and the details of those are found in section 7 in the appendix on page 167 onwards. And the statement reports that progress against 6 previously identified issues is ongoing. We have had 2 new issues for 25-26, and the details are found in section 8 on page 170 and 171. The 2 significant issues are members' code of conduct, both in terms of the volume and nature of complaints and the potential impact on public confidence or reputation. And the second one, we had a presentation earlier on the matter around deficit schools balances, with a net deficit of currently 3.6 million across maintained schools, and ongoing financial pressures to likely require deficits going forward. So these are the 2 key areas where governance focus will be required over the next few months until the final AGS is provided. In addition to significant governance issues, the AGS identifies forward-looking challenges, which will be monitored through existing governance and reporting arrangements, and those are found in section 9 on page 17 onwards. That ensures that governance remains forward-looking and not just retrospective. The role of the committee today is important, and what we're looking for is the committee to review the AGS and confirm it reflects your understanding of governance across the council. Any comments that you provide will be considered for incorporating into the final draft version before publication. Next steps are the provisional AGS will be updated where necessary. It will be published alongside the draft statement of accounts at 30th of June. And then the final audited version will be signed by the Chief Executive and the Leader of the Council, and that's currently scheduled for November. In conclusion, the AGS provides a comprehensive and evidence-based view of governance. Overall arrangements are sound and effective. Key issues have been identified transparently with actions in place, and the process continues to support continuous improvement. That's all I have to say, Chair. I'll take any questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much again, Neil. Any questions on that one? No? Okay. So move to the recommendation. Again, is that seconded, please? Yeah, Mr. Whitford, thank you. All in favour? Excellent. Moving on then to item 16, and I think it's you again, Neil, please.
Thanks again, Chair. For start my presentation, can I just introduce Scott Brownlow as a senior auditor in the audit team? And Scott's was the person who compiled this report, so thank you, Scott. Excuse me. So this is the annual counter fraud report for 2025-26, which summarises the council's counter fraud activity over the last financial year. So a bit of context and assurance is that the council maintains a zero tolerance approach to fraud, corruption and financial irregularity, and recognises its duty to safeguard public funds and assets. Although we are an upper tier authority and not exposed to some high volume fraud risks seen elsewhere, fraud remains a significant risk and strong counter fraud arrangements are essential. Just as a pointer, at a national level, fraud and error are estimated to cost the taxpayer between 55 and 81 billion pounds annually, and local government alone accounting for around just over 2 billion. So responsibility for the counter fraud activity sits within the Internal Audit and Assurance Service, which I manage, with strategic oversight through this committee. Dedicated input is provided by accredited counter fraud specialists, of which Scott is one. We have another. And work includes both proactive activity and reactive investigations. Last year, we spent approximately 73 days to counter fraud work. So investigation activity during the year, 17 new investigations were commenced, 12 were closed with 5 remaining open at the end of the year. But in total, 20 investigations were concluded during the year, including those brought forward. The cases covered a range of areas, including insider or employee matters, social care financial issues, insurance claims, blue badge misuse, and cyber-related incidents. Most issues were low level and appropriately addressed, with some matters referred on to external bodies where relevant. The financial outcomes are often difficult to quantify, but examples this year include in Section 9, rejection of an exaggerated insurance claim, recovery from a provider, social care reassessment, and additional recoveries via the National Fraud Initiative. However, it's important to emphasise a large part of the value that we do lies in prevention and deterrence, improved controls and awareness, and protecting future public funds. The latest fraud risk assessment is at Section 13, page 229, and includes the highest risks as procurement fraud, social care fraud, cyber fraud and mandate fraud, and insider and employee fraud. And the emerging risks are around AI-enabled fraud and cybercrime, and over-employment, something known as career polygamy. There's increasing sophistication of organised fraud. Prevention and culture. So significant work continues to strengthen fraud resilience across the council. We have a mandatory fraud awareness training package, and that is over 88% completion. We have run an International Fraud Awareness Week in November. We've got new reporting routes for fraud. So we've got a fraud mailbox, an online referral form. And then Scott works closely with the police, national fraud bodies and other councils. Just wanted to make members aware of the new corporate offence of a failure to prevent fraud, effective from September 2025. The council has undertaken a risk assessment against that and considers exposure to be low, supported by existing controls and procedures. Excuse me. So in conclusion, the council continues to maintain effective counter-fraud arrangements. Activity levels remain consistent with expectations. Controls are robust, but ongoing vigilance is essential. And fraud risks are evolving, particularly in digital and AI-enabled areas. That's the end of the report. I'm sure Scott and I will please take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. A very important piece of work. Any questions or comments, Mr. Poland?
Thank you very much for the report and presentation. Just sort of give me an idea of how big a issue this is for us in Leicestershire. Sort of how many cases of fraud have we had at this county council in the last year, 5 year, whatever reasonable period of time is for that question. What types of fraud are increasing? And I guess linked to the first question, how many sort of significant losses have occurred to us as an organisation?
I'll take that, thank you. I mean, last year we had 17 new investigations, which is perhaps par for the course what we would expect. I think it's worth emphasising what Neil said earlier. What we do have now are 2 new avenues where fraud can be reported. We have a fraud email, a fraud@leics.gov.uk. We have online reporting as well. So one would reasonably expect our numbers to start to increase because there's now an ability for people to do so. Sometimes when we investigate an investigation, it ends up not actually being fraud. So not all of those 17 fraud investigations would have ended up being fraud. Most are typically low level and dealt with by service managers with internal audit steering. I can't think that we've had anything particularly significant by value. But we do maintain this robust zero tolerance approach, which could lead to typically loss recovery. If it was internal fraud, it would lead to internal disciplinary. And in the most serious of cases, we would liaise with the police to enforce police action.
Thank you for that. So to sort of, again, just to, I'm not sure you answered the one about the types that are increasing. So apologies if I didn't hear that or missed that. So what types are increasing? And I guess linked to that, when we talk about low level fraud, are we, I mean, obviously clearly not talking about individuals, it's not that, but in general terms, are we talking about things like people claiming for overtime they haven't done and stuff like that? Or so can you give me an example of what sort of things we are talking about at that low level?
Yes, sure. Sort of things that we have got, and it is in the report. If you have a look, you will get a better feel for this, if you like. Employee fraud, like you say, is typically low level. It might be something like travel claims, hours not worked, or something like that. Grant claims, the council would distribute grants, and it would not be unreasonable for us to get referrals saying, well, a grant that you've given is not being used how it should be, and we would investigate that to see if that was true or not. Social care remains high, particularly things like, and this is nationally, deprivation of income in the financial assessment process. So people keeping quiet about what assets they hold in order that the county council will pay more for their care than would otherwise be the case. Blue badges, perhaps a bigger issue in the city council where you're near football grounds and hospitals and things like that. But we do have allegations of blue badge fraud or concessionary travel permits. Insurance fraud, we did have a case, but that's relatively rare. Cybercrime, we're being attacked, as are all organisations, all the while with cyber attacks that our normal business as usual systems will pick up and stop. And the typical things like, requests from suppliers, I say suppliers, fraudulent suppliers, to change bank account details, which of course are fraudulent. And our job, both as counter fraud professionals and also the routine internal audit work that we do, is to make sure our systems and controls are there, but also that staff are switched on to these fraud risks through things like fraud awareness, so that when these things do come in, it raises red flags immediately with staff. And we've been lucky in that respect, in that though we do get a lot of these type of attacks, none have been successful. And I think that's successful from our point of view, that we're managing to upskill staff, particularly with fraud awareness.
Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments on that? No. Okay, again, we're asked to note the contents of the report. I'm happy to move that. Is it seconded, please? Yeah, Mr. Orson, thank you very much. All in favour? Excellent, thank you very much. We move on to the Resilience and Business Continuity Annual Update. We've got Zafar here, please.
Thank you, Chair. The report, hopefully members have had a chance to review it. What I'll do is I'll pick out some key highlights, and then I'd welcome or happy to take any questions that councillors have. I think the starting point, just as a reminder, we present the report here annually because we are under a statutory legal obligation under the Civil Contingencies Act. So it's right and proper that members have an assurance that we are discharging our duties, given links quite
to the last report in terms of the number of attacks, certainly around cyber and other areas, and the general risks that are facing the council. In terms of the report itself, if I just chunk it up into different areas, so starting off on page 246, section 6, talking about the council's overall business continuity function. So we're here, it's a small team, is here to make sure that the council systems, processes are resilient. The methodology we adopt is we challenge each department to provide us with a list of critical suppliers. So these are suppliers that we cannot run our business without them. And the mandate on particular departments and contract managers is to make sure that each one of those critical suppliers has a business continuity plan in place. But more than that, the planners, they're aware of what's in the plan, it's been tested, they're cited on it, and they can give RPG, which is the Resilience Planning Group, made up of directors and assistant directors, an assurance that in the event of an emergency, those plans can be stood up and they're tested and they are resilient, so that we can carry on providing services to our most vulnerable individuals and communities out there. So we've gone through that process. We're now confident that we've got all the list in place, and those lists and those plans are tested. The other key piece of work we've done is the second bullet point there, is we're in the process of training all our managers. As you can see from the numbers, that's quite a big exercise, 1,350 managers over a 3-year period. We started well, we've covered the more senior managers, so these are the grade 15s and 16s. So these are typically your service managers and some of your heads of service. And it's to make sure that those 75 colleagues are aware of their obligations individually and as a service, and also and the council's legal responsibilities in that respect. We're now moving on to the much larger cohort, just shy of 12,000 plus 1,275 employees, grades 11 to 15. Now these are mainly your team managers. So they run a specific service. So we're running a program for them. Those will be more online. Where we've had incidents, you can see that there's reference to lessons learned. We then do unpick them. There's an action plan, and that's reported initially to RPG, but then goes up to CMT for sign off. And I'll refer to that later on in the report. We've also tried to benchmark what our service does and our resilience to national standards. So we're working against ISO there, that's listed there. And this to make sure that there is some external validation and some quality assurance and some benchmarking, so that we're not just marking our own homework. And that process is ongoing. In terms of, if I move to paragraph 7 there, in terms of in the event of an incident, so say something happens, the next stage would there'd be an incident management plan stood up. And you can see between paragraph 7 and 11, sorry, there haven't been luckily there haven't been a huge amount of incidents this year, but where we have had an incident at point 8 there, the ICT outage, we have stood up the incident management plan, and we've activated and we worked through it, and there has been a debrief process. I move on to wider, more strategic issues. We also work collaboratively through the Resilience Forum, which hopefully all elected members are aware of. And at paragraph 15 there, you can see the type of training that we've delivered this year. That's quite a significant undertaking because it's across the whole system. So it is Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. So managers, directors, chief officers, voluntary sector, other partners, because in the event of a much bigger incident, a multi-agency incident, we do need everyone's support. We've also, through the LRF, conducted a number of exercises, and they're set out at 16. These are at the third bullet point on under 16, you can see the current type of issue we're looking at, which is influenza, possibly another pandemic. We review cyber all the time, but we're also planning a major exercise called Exercise Mercury later on in the year, where it'll be a major road traffic accident, and we'll be running that off-site. It will involve the voluntary sector, Red Cross, police, fire, ambulance, and that's to test us in the event of, as I said, a coach crash or something else on the M1, and then we having to sadly recover bodies. But the whole purpose of the exercise is not so much management of the incident, is actually how officers react, and that links into the learning from the Grenfell inquiry and the Manchester Arena. It's about challenging the judgment of officers in real time and how their decisions will stand up to external scrutiny through a coroner's inquiry. So there is a lot of pressure on those on-call senior managers and those gold commanders on the day to justify the decisions they make, because some of those could be who you leave behind, who you evacuate first, and why they reach those decisions. That'll be done through a mock coroner's inquiry. So I think they were probably the main things I'd want to highlight. And then in terms of council incidents, they're listed at 17. As I said, thankfully not a huge amount of them. And on the wider multi-agency partnership, there are a number of incidents there listed under paragraph 19. Looking forward at paragraph 20, there's we have a significant work program this year, a combination of continuing with training that I referred to earlier, and exercising, refresher programs, and more around, as I said, leadership issues. We are looking at the configuration of our own team as well. And there is we've had the benefit of transformation unit colleagues coming in, and they've produced us an action plan and an improvement plan, and we're working through that with them. So, Chair, they were the main points I wanted to highlight, but happy to take any questions.
Again, thank you very much. Very important work again. Ms. Poland first, then Mrs. Page.
Thank you. Just out of personal interest, I guess, really, in terms of the mock large-scale exercise, and definitely see how that's important in terms of understanding roles and working together across different agencies. Are officers and people involved actually informed of what the scenario is going to be beforehand? Because it would strike me as probably more useful if we're testing what they would do in real life, that they wouldn't know that, because obviously we don't know what the next major incident is going to be. So do you see what I mean? And what I'm getting at with the question.
It's a mixture. They're not given the detail. All they're just given is a very, very brief, hold this in your diary. We're not going to tell you what it's about. And we don't necessarily designate them any roles either. So they could turn up, for example, they could be the chief superintendent, who typically wouldn't act as the gold commander, because that would be the deputy chief constable or the assistant chief constable, but we may surprise them and flip them and do that. And similarly, we tend to run it as a real-time incident, so we provide injects which get even more difficult. So it starts off relatively easy, and then it says, for example, in the case of an evacuation, suddenly there's a fire, or the exit's blocked. What would you do? Or you need an interpreter, for example, because it's a coach of Japanese. Well, I'm not picking on Japanese or any particular nationality, but it's a coach class involving, school children, but also a tourist bus. So what would you do? So it's a combination, just so we can hold it in their diaries. Otherwise, their diaries will get but we won't give them the exact level of detail.
Mrs. Page.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks a lot, Safa, for this report. when you're actually reading this report, it's one of those things which you've never heard of unless you actually read the report, even as a member. And there's so much background, so much, so many operational, strategic issues, and so many wider aspects to it. And I always find it very interesting, all of the things this council actually does to protect and work for the residents. And it's actually a very, very basic question I've got. Do I assume that all of these things and all of these training, is that on top of an officer's day job? So say, for instance, do you know what I'm trying to ask? So, somebody, say Fiona, works there. Does Fiona then take additional training? And how is that incorporated? And is the staff actually appreciated for that? Just talk me a little bit around it. And thank you to you and all of the members of staff who are actually taking part in all of this.
The answer to your question is yes. For Fiona, myself, Simone, and others. So, and it's based on grade primarily. So, okay, as well. Anyone above a certain grade is automatically put onto the on-call senior manager's rota. So, how that works is we can't predict when an incident is going to happen. So, all officers on a particular grade are allocated a week. So we all get a certain number of weeks per year, and that's on top of the day job. That is 7 days. That's every day, 7 days during that week, including the holidays and bank holidays or any other leave, and it is 24 hours. So it's quite intensive in that week, and the week runs from Monday afternoon to the following Monday morning, and then it's handed over to another on-call. So we've got the continuity all the way through. So there is no break period. So an assurance, and that's part of the role. Then in terms of the next level down, then there are a range of other heads of service who discharge the more tactical role. And again, they're called in when there's more of an incident, but it's the same issue. They would have to do it on top of their existing role. And then fortunately, and we've never had any reluctance for anyone coming forward, we then have general service managers, those grades 11 to 15 that I've described, the team managers, and they've always volunteered to come forward. So whilst there's no obligation on those grades 11 to 15, whenever we've had an incident, we've had, to be honest, too many volunteers. People generally want to help for all the reasons that you've indicated. They wish to help their local communities.
Thank you. And I'm sure we're very grateful to all of these members of staff. And you can see it when we had the storm, how many members of staff actually got quietly involved and did their job. So I'm sure it's greatly appreciated by all of us. Thank you.
Suppose.
Yeah, I'll keep it quick, Chair. Apologies. I firstly, I echo the comments. Thank you so much. It's a really interesting report, actually, when you see the breadth of the work and not only externally, when you mention the floods and things, but internally as well. And it's that where my question lies, really. Reading through what you do and how you respond, there seems to be a lot of shared responsibility, actually, or similarities, sorry, with what's about to come up with LGR, because we're going to have gaps in provision. We might potentially have incidents we can't predict because we're transferring responsibility. And I wonder if any of the learns or any of the behaviours or the training could be actually applied to sort of mitigate some of those potential pitfalls, just for your knowledge, crude knowledge, because it seems like you have such a broad breadth of knowledge now and experience at handling some of these events. And I wonder how that might be passed forward or used to handle some of those potential challenges.
Probably 2 points in response. I think in terms of the local government review process, that's, I think Neil referred to it in his report. There's a statutory change order which has been agreed between all 10 local authorities, and under that we have to give central government an assurance that whenever the day or whatever the decision is, that from that first day all services are safe and legal. And once we've been given the date and the go ahead, we'll be working back from there to use some of the plans we've got, the documents, in order to give that assurance. Because whilst we may be clear about our own services, as you've indicated, some services may transfer between the different local authorities depending on the model. And so we'd have to have that assurance. That so once we've got that decision, there's a whole range of work programs that will kick off, and there will be one specifically around data, for example, information sharing protocols, audit, legal, finance, HR, but there'll also be some work around emergency management as well. However, the second point to the answer, or the second answer I was going to give, is it's also worth bearing in mind that all these arrangements I've talked about cover all 10 local authorities. So in many respects, we're slightly insulated from any changes, because the overall footprint, there are 1.2 million people that live across LLR, and the services we operate, they're jointly with the district councils, and they're jointly with the city council, and they're jointly with Rutland. In fact, we provide certainly the business continuity functions, the emergency planning for all the districts and Rutland as well. And we've got a very close working relationship with the city. So whilst you can never say never, I think we've got enough robustness there in the system to make sure that any known risks we can manage, and then we've got enough plans in place to manage any unknown risks.
Thank you. Anything else on that item? No, thank you very much, Zafar. The recommendation is again to note the report. Move that. Is that seconded, please? Yeah, again, Mr. Whitford, thank you. All in favour? Again, it's carried. Thank you very much. So we're getting through now. Item 18, contract procedure rules, and we've got Kate here. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Chair. In January, I came to you and presented to you the contract procedure rules that we follow for the council for procurement and contract management. And I'm here today to present an annual report on the operation of those contract procedure rules from the period of 1st of April 25 to 31st of March 2026. And ask that the committee notes its contents. The purpose of the report is essentially to provide you with oversight of how the contract procedure rules have operated during the year, and provide transparency on those approved exceptions to the rules, and on any contract extensions or modifications where provision wasn't included in the original contract. These matters are reported annually to this committee, and that's in line with the requirements of the contract procedure rules. So during the reporting period, we had 27 approved exceptions that were recorded. This is a significant reduction for us, which is fantastic, and reflects work done to improve our procurement planning, compliance and oversight. The corporate procurement boards played an important role in this, improving by providing additional challenge and guidance and support to departments. The report also sets out approved contract extensions and modifications where there was no provision. There were 37 of these approvals during the period. And it's important to note, whilst this does show an increase on previous years, it just reflects individual operational requirements that were scrutinised rather than a single trend or issue to be noted, and each case was considered and approved on its own merits and in accordance with the contract procedure rules. The report also records 3 contracts that we've awarded under the provider selection regime during the year. 2 of those were awarded using process B and 1 using process C. And that reflects the requirement for the organisation to include PSR procurement decisions within our annual reporting arrangements. To sort of bolster the compliance of everything, we quarterly report to the corporate management team with information that's broken down by department. And this really helps focus the accountability and supports directors to improve their planning and forecasting and compliance for their particular areas. And the Corporate Procurement Board has also developed guidance on managing contract extensions to help ensure extensions provide good value for the council, as well as the kind of operational benefit that may come. Looking ahead, the annual reporting will remain aligned to the financial year. However, there was a recommendation from Grant Thornton for us to consider an increase in the reporting frequency for 26-27. So it's likely that I will be coming to you with a mid-year report at the same time as the January committee report on the refresh of the contract procedure rules alongside this existing update. So any questions or issues?
Brilliant. Thank you, Kay. Rosita.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. Please bear with me. On page 254, table 1, so the comparison of approved exception has gone down to, you know, just below 50%. And it is explained there. It is because of better working and, you know, being more efficient in the scrutiny of what's going on. And yes, I can see that. And that is really commendable and great work. But then on page 255, the approved contract extension and modifications have gone up over the time of the table from 26 million to 355 million. Now, and it's only double the extension, yet the figure is absolutely huge. And I can't get my head around that. So it says the increase reflects the number of individual cases arising. So yes, but why are we talking such a big figure? Is that also inflation? Just talk me through it, because that's astronomical. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yes. So to note on the exceptions, it is a step forward. We would like to be in a position of none, but there is always a point that some exceptions are required. In terms of the value of the modifications and the extensions, it's really just dependent on the particular contract in which we've had to modify, and we take into account the whole value of the contract. So if you look at the table that's in Appendix A, it's on the second sheet. There's a list of all the contracts that we've actually modified or extended, and you can see the full contract value. I don't think the figure is sort of reflective of what's happened. So it's not that we've increased or modified by that sort of huge millions of pounds and that it's any kind of one reason. It's just that the contracts that we've actually had to extend or modify, that they're just higher value in total. So I mean, I can go through with you and I can get a report to you on the details of all of those, but it's not, the figure doesn't really represent a concern, if that makes sense, just more the total value of all the contracts.
So is the future, through you, Chairman, sorry, is the future prognosis to evaluate that, to see where one can have some flexibility within the contracts, so it doesn't continue to happen and to rise? Is there, you know, because it seems to be that public authorities, say for instance, well, you know, that all of a sudden it increases because it's a public authority and because the contractors can. So, you know, how are you going to address this in future to sort of minimize this? Thank you.
Okay. I think obviously we do scrutinise all of the extensions or modifications that are put through and proposed. So they are all considered. If I'm being honest, I think you'll see an increase in them in the next coming years, just because of local government reorganisation. So as we are starting to transition, we'll be looking at all of the contracts that we've got, all of the contracts that the city, the districts have got, and in some cases it may benefit us to extend those contracts where there aren't any provision to do so, to then enable us to procure it together. So I think it really is on a case by case basis. So I wouldn't want to sit here and promise you that, oh, next year we'll get this number down, because I think it has to be based on merit of the actual contract. But we are looking at clauses that we can put within our contracts that allow for those breakpoints so that we can continue business as usual, because we've got to, but allow us to change things when we need to.
One more question, Chairman, through you. So in these contracts, do we build in quality assurance, and if the quality is not up to standard, that we have clawbacks? Because sometimes these contractors get too happy, and because when you're talking about a big contract, yes, I see that a big contract is financially better, but then you have the problem of evaluating and checking what's actually being done, and then you got slippage in the quality, and then is there a clawback situation? And thank you very much for your report.
All of our contracts have key performance indicators, so things that we will have said we want the provider to meet, obligations that they need to comply with, and we will monitor and check against those key performance indicators. The Procurement Act brought in the requirement for any of the contracts over 5 million for us to report publicly on the performance of those contracts. So it gives other councils the opportunities, including us, to see how providers are performing for other people. In terms of clawbacks, it really depends on what we're buying as to how much of a risk there is, as to whether we put that kind of mechanism or service credit or whatever it might look like within the contract. And that would be analysed at the point of procurement to see if it was something that we would deem necessary or not. But yeah, we do have mechanisms for managing performance.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments on this report? No, excellent. Again, we asked to note the recommendation. Those in favour? Excellent. So we move on. We're near the end now. We're getting on to the terms of reference, which is updated following the council decision, I think. And I think Fiona's going to present that. Can I just thank all officers for their reports today, by the way. I know some people have got to leave, so thank you very much. Fiona.
Thank you, Chair. So this report asks the committee to approve a revised set of terms of reference for the Corporate Governance Committee. The purpose is to ensure that the committee's remit is up to date and accurately reflects the constitutional changes already approved by County Council. So as you know, there were changes approved by full council on the 13th of May this year, where responsibility for member standards and conduct has now transferred to the new Constitution and Ethics Committee. The revised terms of reference before you today therefore remove those standards and conduct functions and instead refocus this committee clearly on its core role as the Council's Audit and Governance Committee. The main changes are, first of all, the removal of conduct-related responsibilities. Second, the inclusion of responsibility for approving the annual governance statement. And lastly, a clearer presentation of the committee's functions under headings such as governance and risk, financial management and accounts, external audit and internal audit. Overall, these changes provide a clearer separation between audit and governance functions on one hand and member conduct on the other. And that supports a stronger governance framework and aligns your remit more closely with recognised good practice. So the recommendation is therefore that revised terms of reference as set out in the appendix are approved.
Thank you, Fiona. I think, as I say, this is pretty much a tidying up exercise, isn't it, from council? So is there any comments? No. I assume we're all happy to agree that, are we? Yeah, okay, brilliant. So we move on then to the last item, and that is the annual report, which will go forward to council, I think, doesn't it?
Thank you, me again. So this report is the annual report of the Corporate Governance Committee for 2025-26. It's good practice for all local authority audit committees to report annually on how they have discharged their responsibilities. The report is an important part of our wider assurance framework. It sets out the work undertaken by the committee over the year to provide independent assurance on the council's governance, risk management, internal control arrangements and financial control. It highlights the range of issues the committee has considered, the challenge it has provided and where it has sought further assurance from officers. It also draws out key governance themes arising from that work, which are relevant to all members, and reinforces the committee's role in supporting transparency, accountability and public confidence in how the council is run. On page 285, it includes a statement from the committee's 2 independent members. Over the course of the year, the committee has maintained a strong focus on its core statutory and assurance functions. It's continued to operate in a challenging financial and organisational context, including ongoing financial pressures, increasing service demand, and the wider uncertainty associated with local government reorganisation. Despite this, the overall picture from the Head of Internal Audit remains positive, and this reflects both the strength of the Council's control environment and the constructive engagement between officers and this committee. The report also highlights areas where continued focus is required, including the MTFS, areas of ongoing pressure such as SEND and social care, and ensuring that governance and control arrangements continue to adapt to emerging risks and forthcoming organisational change. The report will be reported onwards to full council, so all members are aware of the work undertaken by this committee.
Thank you, Fiona. The only issue I've got is the photograph of me, but I guess it's a camera, not a magic wand. So, any questions or comments on this? No, as I say, I think this does go to council, so we can debate it there as well. And that concludes the business, other than to say that the next meeting is on the 19th of September. Thank you very much for your attendance, and go away and enjoy the sunshine. Thank you.